But let's talk about my favorite future president, Pete Buttigieg, and his response to a question about a place called Gaza.
More than half of Senate Democrats just voted to oppose the sale of over $500 million worth of U.S. bombs and guns to Israel. Would you have voted to oppose sending those weapons?
I think we need to insist that if American taxpayer funding is going to weaponry that is going to Israel, that is not going to things that shock the conscience. And look, we see images every day that shock the conscience. So much of this is complicated. But what's not complicated is that if a child is starving because of a choice made by a government.
We could say more about this later, but it's not really that complicated. And it's such a weird thing to do, to continue to talk about the complexity of a situation. As Sean points out in the chat, he's asked a very point blank question. Would you have blocked that arms sale? He doesn't say yes. He doesn't say no. I think he clearly is saying no. And he sort of cribs it in this weird, like, what if we were just all decent? What if we all just did the right thing? But he's avoiding actually saying anything. And note that this is the guy who they're going to want to be the next president. Let's let him keep talking.
That is unconscionable. And I think especially including voices who care about Israel, who believe in Israel's right to exist, who have stood.
Note that, like, no one in these discussions ever pauses to say, we care about Palestine. We believe in Palestine's right to exist. We believe that Palestinian people have political agency and autonomy. They never say that. Because in all of these discussions, like, people are constantly making excuses for their critique of Israel. And the new move is like, it's all Netanyahu and stuff like that. It's all right there. They do the thing. We just have to pay attention to them.
Good with Israel in response to the unbelievable cruelty and terrorism of October 7th. I think,
like, we can acknowledge that October 7th was bad. It was 2 years ago. Since then, tens of thousands of kids have died, have starved, have been fucking sniper rifled. And you still have to do the obligatory, like, shout out to the Israeli project thing.
I think there's a reason why so many of those voices are speaking up now too, because this is not just something that is on its face and in itself a moral catastrophe. It is also a catastrophe for Israel for the long.
So it's bad because it's going to have a bad downstream effect on Israel. This is like almost saying, like, it's not morally bad. It's not ethically odious. It just might have some bad downstream effects on our partner in democracy in the Middle East. I mean, I'm starting to call this the Miss Rachel test. You know, Miss Rachel, someone who, like, up until however many months ago, no one thought about in political terms, a very popular children's entertainer and educator. If Miss Rachel is asked this question, she would talk for 2 seconds. She would just be like, yeah, it's a genocide. It's bad. Stop killing kids. We shouldn't be complicit in that. Why is a children's performer and singer able to operate with a level of political and moral clarity that political leaders can operate with? I think I'm going to make a video about that, by the way.
How do you think the next administration should handle our relationship with Israel? Do you think it should change based on what Netanyahu has done the last several years?
Well, certainly Netanyahu can't be the only voice or the only compass for what should happen in the U.S.-Israel relationship. And, you know, no matter how strongly, or especially because of how strongly you might believe in Israel's right to exist and defend itself, you don't have to make excuses for the choices that Netanyahu is making, especially because they are often made not only in the name of the Israeli people, but in the name of a U.S. alliance. I think that
the American government has let Netanyahu do whatever he has wanted. There's not been any formal pushback towards anything he's done. So A, there hasn't been that resistance there. B, I think a weird thing is starting to happen where a lot of the American liberal leaders who have been really soft on this stuff have now realized that we're watching a bunch of kids get starved to death. But they're going to be like, Yeah, but Netanyahu did it. Everything else is fine. This isn't a systemic issue. It's just like one bad guy. It's just the one bad guy.
Israel's strongest ally and friend. You put your arm around your friend when there's something like this going on, and talk about what we're prepared to do.
So when your friend is mass starving children, you put your arm around the friend that's mass starving children and say, "Hey, what are we going to do about this together?" If any of you guys have friends who are mass starving children, I would say don't put your arm around them unless you're putting your arm around them to throw them in the back of a van and drive them into the desert to leave them there with one bottle of water. I don't know, like a tattered copy of a survival guide in a language that they don't speak, and a knife.
Together. It certainly cannot be what we see right now from this administration and this president talking about beachfront property in Gaza before he's prepared to talk about human suffering in Gaza.
Do you think it's time to recognize a Palestinian state?
I think that's a.
Do you think it's time to recognize a Palestinian state? I think that's a wow. It's a deep. Like, can't you just say yes? Can't we just say that people that live in a place deserve a level of political agency and autonomy in the place in which they live?
Profound question that arouses a lot of the biggest problems that have happened with Israel's survival, Israel's right to survival.
Oh, he laughs when he's nervous and doesn't know what to say. What is
in the diplomatic scene, and many of the people who have taken that step historically have done so for different reasons than what we see happening with European countries.
You're smart, you guys. I'm pretty smart. We're all watching this guy together. It doesn't make sense. Now, we might be thinking here, Michael, are we just sort of like participating in the rage baiting cycle by watching a Pod Save America clip of Pete Buttigieg say some stuff that we know is bad? Maybe we're doing that. Maybe all I'm doing right now is reproducing a cycle of political inactivity where we react to a clip and then we feel emotionally like we're doing something so we can go on with our day of content consumption. Maybe that's what I'm doing. I do think that a part of what's going on here is like they are trying out their talking points. They are soft launching the talking points that they are going to use in the midterms and in the 2028 election. Because, as they learned via the Harris campaign, enough voters in America care about a US-backed genocide, care about children who are being starved to death for no reason. They care about this stuff. And they're fed up with the idea that their tax money is going towards that. They're fed up with the idea that the country they live in, that's supposed to be the shining light of democracy on the hill, is actively complicit in and facilitating that genocide. So they're testing out talking points they can use when they tell us in the midterms of 2026 and in 2028 that it's our moral imperative to vote for anyone that's not the bad guys. When they tell us that we need to go to the polls to vote for candidates who, for all we know, might be AIPAC funded because it's our moral duty. And they're trying out these talking points because what they want to do is create just enough space for us to project what we want onto what they're saying, even though they don't believe any of it. And we got to sort of get ready, smell the bullshit now, because we need to be ready to ruthlessly critique and respond to that when it starts happening. So maybe that's me just kind of like over justifying why I'm spending time doing this. I don't know, but I think that could be important. We'll watch the rest of this clip. Thanks for being here.
I think we need to step back and we need to do whatever it takes to ensure that there is a real two-state solution and that no one, not even the likes of Netanyahu, can veto the international community's commitment to a two-state solution where you have Palestinians and Israelis living with safety, with security, with rights. I believe that can happen, but we have to actually show some commitment to it.
Okay. Oops. Whew. That's a tough one. Anytime you got to watch Mayor Pete, it's a tough one. A thing I want to start talking about, and a thing I want to make a video about soon, I think I am going to make a video on it, is that, there's like a myth of complexity. There's a mythology that so many things are so much more complex when they are. And something I've realized in in reading philosophy, reading political philosophy, getting into that sort of stuff in my early 20s, a lot of the big thinkers are a lot simpler than we might realize. A lot of these like moral theories are pretty simple. The complexity is often used to mask bullshit. Complexity is often used to let people lie to themselves and others about doing bad stuff. But like human equality is a pretty simple idea. Egalitarianism is a pretty simple idea. Having a simple moral principle that says that the mass starvation of children is always and in every case wrong, and any political or social support of that is wrong. That's so simple and it's so easy. And it's wild that more people don't get that. It's wild that it's hard for people to see that. I have a clip I'm going to pull up. I'm pretty sure that it is, and I'm going to check this so I can be right, so I don't just make claims that are untrue. Yeah, so today would have been or is the birthday of Michael Brooks, someone who I talked about in a recent video, my video on the left, and used as an example for what it means to focus on the critiques of systems and not people, or what it means to be a leftist and still be a human. And he once gave a talk about some of the same stuff, or response in a talk to the same stuff that Pete Buttigieg is talking about. I'm going to send the link right now. We'll watch a bit of this. I don't know if we'll watch the whole thing, but if you haven't seen this clip before, I think it's important, and it's a great one to potentially show to folks in your life who you care about and who are smart and thoughtful people, but who kind of like fall for it. And let's be clear here. I have fallen for it in my life. Many smart people I know have fallen for the BS of overcomplication, have fallen for the it's not as simple as that. We have to understand the geopolitics, and you really got to do like a Henry Kissinger thing, yada, yada, yada. So look at this Michael Brooks clip. And shout out to this man. He was a real good one. We lost him too soon, and happy birthday to him.
So my first question, it says on your Twitter that you're Jewish. Am I getting this right?
No.
Is it the right Twitter?
On my Twitter bio, it says I'm Jewish?
No, but like in your tweets. I don't want to be wrong.
I have Jewish background. I'm just trying to think of...
Okay, so as someone with a Jewish background,
yes,
how do you feel about Bernie's plan for Israel, especially as someone concerned with foreign policy?
I love it. It's an absolutely necessary. My Jewish values teach me to oppose apartheid.
So look at the simplicity of that. My Jewish values teach me to oppose apartheid. Now, in general, apartheid is bad. I hope we can all agree on that. But if there's something you get from the Jewish tradition, the Christian tradition, scripture, like it's there. Like it's there. It is implicit in the thing itself. There's not a complexity to it. Apartheid is bad. And when apartheid exists, we should resist it. But I'll let the man himself keep talking.
Okay. Could you elaborate, please?
I mean, there really isn't that much to elaborate on. I mean, has anybody ever been not only to Israel, but also to the... Have you been to...
I've been to the West Bank.
Have you been to the West Bank? Have you been to Gaza?
Yep.
You went to Gaza?
I went to the border.
Oh, okay. But not to Gaza.
You can't be in Gaza.
Well, I know people who've gone to Gaza. You could definitely go to Gaza.
I mean, wild to watch this too. This is years ago, so, context of Gaza now.
So for me, my politics are built on a base of, economic justice and actually really like anti-racism, as in some ways as distinct from some of this sort of woke stuff in a way. But when I was already, I grew up, I was pretty connected to left politics, so I always knew growing up about the travesty that was the human rights situation there. And I knew that people I admired, like Nelson Mandela, said, South Africa is going to not be properly free until the Palestinians are free. In 2006, I believe, I read a piece by a guy named Tony Judt in the New York Review of Books, who was a really important Jewish scholar.
And for anyone just tuning in, we're watching a clip from Michael Brooks, whose birthday would have been today, responding to a question about the moral complexity of the situation between Israel and Palestine, Israel and Gaza. Watching this both because it's Brooks's birthday, and shout out to him, and watching it as a sort of response or another way of looking at the response that we saw Pete Buttigieg give when asked something similar.
And he just said, the argument was that, literally this is childish. Like, the idea that you have an ethno-state or a religious state, if you're committed to any type of broad-based social, economic equity and civil society, it doesn't work. No matter how justified, right? Of course there's justification because of Jewish history for Israel. There's justification for Kurdistan because of Kurdish reality. There's justification for Pakistan. It's notable that Israel and Pakistan are both disasters. Israel not in the sense of, look, if you're a European Jewish background, you have a nice life there. If you're not, you are, even inside 67 borders, not a fully equal citizen. And the situation in...
And it's important, too, that he's, this clip is from 10 years ago, or maybe, sorry, not 10 years ago, 20, let's see if it says it on the thing. I don't know. It's from a bit ago. And he's still getting at the way in which pre-October 7th, a lot of the atrocities that are happening now, with a very simple lens, we're talking about an apartheid society. We're talking about people have fundamentally different human rights, different access to economic and educational and health opportunities based on ethnicity, religion, skin color, what side of a line they were born on.
The West Bank is, it is literally Jim Crow-like, and Gaza is, it's just an atrocity. So that's not something that anybody could reasonably ask me to support. And I understand, there's some actions from some Palestinian groups that, we can condemn. In fact, those have not even really been in any way seriously in play since 2003. And when we talk about, look, and the apartheid word specifically is both used by people who were crucial in ending apartheid in South Africa, like Desmond Tutu or Ronnie Kasrils, who...
And think about language as well. Apartheid is a horrific system, but a relatively simple concept to understand. Genocide, a horrific thing, simple concept to understand. And we are in a political system where a lot of the quote unquote good guys jump through linguistic hoops to try to tell us why apartheid isn't actually apartheid, why genocide isn't actually genocide.
Served as intelligence minister under Mbeki, who I've interviewed. And the other main people who use the apartheid word are Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak. So it is what it is. And I don't support second-class citizenship and occupation and sieges for anybody, no matter who they are.
Are you not concerned about the binary between either condemning Israel entirely?
I think this is the juicy part right here.
Being also a stance that a lot of very strong and notorious anti-Semitic people agree with, versus seeing this as more of a complex issue where it is wrong what's going on, and that there's also a way to do this, that Israel still exists and is supported.
And I want to say something too. And I think Brooks treats the woman who's asking this question very fairly, and I think we can as well. I don't think that's an unfair question, and I think it seems to me like it's asked earnestly. And I've had many a conversation with a person who asks something similar, and I think it's a question that we can take seriously and not demean a person for asking it. And I think the way he responds here, I just want to say again, is a good model of how we can have these discussions where we don't fall into the liberal logic of things that we see in a Buttigieg, but we also don't just become dicks.
So it's not a complex issue. That's the big thing. It's super simple. There's one group that has enormous power. It's the most powerful country in the Middle East. It's backed by the United States. It acts on another population of people with total impunity and is never held accountable for anything. So there's no symmetry in the relationship, period. And just as like a thought experiment, IDW people, if we know that if somehow a population of Jewish refugees ended up in West Bank and Gaza, and an Arabic government in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv had an open-air prison in Jewish Gaza, which they bombed with white phosphorus, they killed civilians indiscriminately, and they had no provisions for medicine. They had an embargo that blocked food, that electricity wasn't running, that there was an over 48% unemployment rate, life expectancy and malnutrition statistics were horrifying. One of the major policymakers in this hypothetical Arabic Palestinian state said, we need to put those Jews on a diet. In the West Bank, there was another Jewish area where there was a little bit more autonomy, but there was regular Arabic settlements where they pulled up the Jewish farmers' foods.
I realize I'm just letting this go without pausing, but I think it's important. Again, happy birthday, Michael Brooks.
Terrorized them with rocks. The security forces broke children's bones, and they couldn't drive their own roads. We'd all have no problem understanding what that was. So there's nothing complex about it. The second part of your question, it's a pure asymmetry relationship. And the question is rights or not. So that's it. It's not complicated. The second part of your question, at this point, there's always going to be crackpots who are anti-Semitic who condemn Israel. That's not what drives the movement, particularly in the United States. If you work around most people who are concerned with this issue, it's actually populated with a lot of Jewish people. The real question we have to ask is, why is it that AIPAC is hosting an information minister for Slobodan Milosevic? Why is it that there's relationships between the Israeli government and far-right parties in Europe? Why is it that Benjamin Netanyahu's son is posting borderline alt-right memes? Why is it that Israel is an alt-right state, even though it is from the descendants of the victims of one of the greatest crimes in history? That's a serious question, and that's inseparable from the racism of the project, which goes back to the first part that we have to solve.
Okay, so I'll post a link to this again. If you're not familiar with Michael Brooks, he was one of the hosts of the Majority Report. I see someone in the chat just said he was the white boy with the sauce. Absolutely so. Michael Brooks is absolutely the white boy with the sauce. And I see that the chat has been having fun. I'm just kind of checking up because I hate to miss it. Let's see. We're not the good guys in this. Yeah, I don't. And I think I saw some questions about like individual. I can't see it now, but someone asked, I think this relates to all of this. Do not watch it. What do philosophers say on the application of moral frameworks to geopolitics, inter-sovereign relationships compared to interpersonal or social settings? Is there a distinction to make here? I think in a sense, like, here's how I think about it. And this is just me. This is just me talking. If you have an individual ethical moral framework, if you have a viewpoint for how people should treat each other in individual one-to-one relationships or in sort of social settings, well, then the question is politically, what are the political or economic conditions that facilitate your ideal ethical situation? And if you are holding an ethical view in one hand that's impossible via a certain political condition, then we have a bit of a contradiction at play, right? So I think if I'm going to say that, like, ethically, we should, let's even be Kantian for a second. I'm not saying I'm Kantian in this way. I think there's worse systems you could believe in. But Kantian ethics, deontology, categorical imperative, act in such a way that you would will that your action be a universal law. It implies a type of freedom. To be Kantian, I need the freedom to make an ethical decision. I need the freedom to think about how my actions affect others. If I am not free, if I am coerced, if I don't have some sort of baseline human rights, it's hard to even participate in that sort of ethics. So in that clip, when Michael Brooks talks about the asymmetry between Palestinians and Israelis, how can we think about a moral framework in a place where one group of people doesn't have the same access to social and political and economic freedom? Think about it in the way of like, how do we think morally if in an oppressed society, if a rich person steals from a poor person, how do we feel about that ethically? If a poor person desperate to feed their kids steals a loaf of bread, how do we think about that person? We want to think ethically about a society where egalitarianism is a baseline condition so that we all have the freedom to act in that sort of way. So that's sort of a kind of response to this. A lot of people have talked about this as well. And I think that, you find a lot of ethical philosophers who then have a social system built on it. And I think like even back to Aristotle will talk about ethics, like in his Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle will talk about ethics in terms of individual relations. And in individual relations, he calls it virtue. It's virtuous if I act ethically towards you. But what is virtue? What is it to be ethical? It's the good of another. And to really care about the good of another, well, I have to have a sense of justice. And that's when it becomes a social and political thing, because it's not just about being a good person. It's about creating a society that's grounded in some principle of justice. And I think any society that has apartheid or rigid class systems or oppression or racism cooked into it, you're just not going to have that. So I think, and I think Sean's asking this question about virtue and scale of application. I mean, the way I think about it is that like, or how I think about it, it's like what is virtue at one level becomes justice when our frame becomes the political. But I think what we do a little bit too much in American liberal circles is we say, well, we live under capitalism. We live under a system where there's a lot of military influence and control and financial system control and Wall Street control, a lot of built-in class stuff, a lot of economic instability and security, and bifurcation. But you need to be good as a person. You need to be good to your neighbors or whatever it might be, which is really hard, or is really like, and this is kind of like the Buttigieg type thing. It's when politicians will talk about like decency or whatever. What they're doing is they're trying to reduce structural issues to individual actions. They're not going to say, hey, we live in a country where people are sick and poor. We should give people health care. We live in a country where children are falling behind and are food insecure. They're not going to say, let's refund public education and provide school lunches for all children, free of cost, no matter what. They're not going to do that. They're going to make it an individual issue. A charter school, a charity, you should do this, you should do that, while the government then funnels billions of dollars to weapons that are being used to kill kids. So, and I think, I like this. Someone in the chat said a form of forward empathy out of your ability to project yourself into the frame of mind. Yeah. But, and I think it always, and yeah, Sean uses this example, like the example of major corporations make us feel guilty for not recycling a can of pop, where they're devastating the climate on a regular basis. I think we have to think about things in those terms. And again, shout out Michael Brooks on his birthday. That's why I said we need to be kind to individuals and ruthless to systems. But what we then have is this weird reversed imperative where we put all of the moral weight on individuals for the sake of ignoring systems. You see it a little bit in the Pete Buttigieg thing we watched before from Pod Save America. He doesn't talk about the structure of Israeli society in the Israeli geopolitical project. It's like Netanyahu's a bad guy. Well, here's the secret, folks. Take Netanyahu out of the situation, and it's still not good. You don't take Netanyahu out, and all of a sudden apartheid is over. There's systems that need to be critiqued and evaluated, but problem is those systems are beneficial to United States power. So stuff that we need to think about.